Me in the book of Daniel, chapter 3. Daniel, chapter 3. The book of Daniel starts about 20 years before Nebuchadnezzar and the armies of Babylon destroy the city of Jerusalem and the nation of Judah. It begins during the days of King Jehoiakim, when Nebuchadnezzar has come in and uh, enforced his authority upon the nation at that time, and as sort of a way of guaranteeing, hopefully, that people would succumb or submit to his power and will and authority, he took some of the younger people of the higher part of the society of Judah back to Babylon with him. This accomplished several purposes. Of course, first of all, it was sort of an implied threat to those who still remained in the nation, that if they did not submit to his will, their own children would be under threat of maybe punishment or even death. But it also provided a connection between him and his court and what was going on over there. It also provided for him some of the best that Judah had to offer in terms of possible leadership in the future within his own administration. And that is, in fact, what he used many of these young men for. And so chapter 1 is the story of the very first conflict that particularly four of them have with some of the rules and regulations of the court of Babylon, in which we meet these young men, Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah, who are then given Babylonian names and connected that way, and we then end up knowing uh, them as Belteshazzar and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. But we see that these four men at least, are part of that faithful remnant that God still had there in Judah, while the whole nation is eventually going to be destroyed because of their idolatry and failure to keep God's law. Clearly, these four young men were a part of that minority that were committed to doing God's will no matter what the rest of their own nation, culture, and society were doing. In chapter 2, as Daniel has been elevated up to a wise man in the courts of Nebuchadnezzar, and he seemed to have had many of those. We have the story of Nebuchadnezzar having a dream. And this dream was so disturbing to him and so concerning to him that he calls in his wise men and said, I want you to tell me about the dream that I had. Number one, tell me what I dreamed. And then number two, what does it mean? He sort of had some insight into his own wise men. He knew that if he told them the dream, they would always come up with some explanation. But now they have to tell him what was the dream. If they truly have the power of the gods with them and special insight and wisdom that others don't have, surely they could tell him what he dreamed and then tell him what it meant. Only Daniel was able to do that. This is that story we know so well and told to our children and Sunday school class and so forth, about the great statue with the upper portion out of gold and the mid portion out of silver, and then as you move down, the material it's made out of is of less and less value in terms of the world's measure. And only Daniel, given by revelation of God, could tell him what he dreamed and then what it meant. That it represented Nebuchadnezzar being the head of a great nation, an empire that was going to eventually be replaced by another and then another and then another. Until in the days of that last empire, that God was going to raise up a kingdom that would destroy and swallow up the remains of all of these empires and grow and fill the whole earth. And of course, we recognize that as being a messianic prophecy and a kingdom prophecy. But then when chapter 3 opens, at some point in the future after that, and we're not sure exactly when, because Daniel didn't choose and the Holy Spirit didn't guide him to put a date to this particular time, we kind of assume that Judah still stands, that it hasn't fallen to Nebuchadnezzar yet. They're not in that last great conflict that took place around 588, 587 BC to make that happen. But the king, it says in chapter 3, verse 1, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Most of the great works that Nebuchadnezzar did in his day have long since disappeared. Archaeologists even today are still digging up portions of his great works from that time, his city, his palace, his other cities that he built and so forth. He would later brag, even in the book here, that there was nothing of Babylon he did not himself build. Though probably he didn't lift a single brick himself. But he was in charge of it and saw that happened. And in fact, untold thousands of bricks are still being uncovered today, every one of which that has his name on them. He wanted future generations to know, I did this. I did this. But now he's erecting this great image just outside of the city of Babylon on this great plain, and by the height of it, it would be one that would be seen from miles and miles away in every direction. And while that image doesn't exist today, archaeologists have found a great platform on which such an image could have been erected that still stands today, with the bricks of Nebuchadnezzar in its base. And it also doesn't tell us here, and that's probably on purpose by Daniel, what the image was of. We might at first think that it was an image of Nebuchadnezzar himself, but it never says that. Others suggest that it was probably a great image of the chief god of the many gods that he worshipped, a god by the name of Marduk. But again, it doesn't say that either. And some have even suggested, in light of what happened in the chapter before, when he had that dream of that great image, that he was trying to recreate an image of what he had dreamed about. I suppose any of those are possible, and there's probably other possibilities as well. That doesn't seem to be the point of the lesson that Daniel is going to bring to us. But what is a part of the point is that whatever the image was, it was going to be required that you worship it. And so then it says, he then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Now, among these many officials that are named here, and these are not the ordinary people of the nation. These are the leaders, the administrators of the nation, or at least this part of his empire at this time. Among them would be listed Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And yet Daniel, we end up hearing in the story, apparently is not present. Maybe he's away on official business, or we don't know why. But certainly these other three men are here because they earlier in Daniel have been elevated up to positions of authority. And they literally owe their jobs and their high positions to Nebuchadnezzar. So everyone's assembled before this great statue. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language." So it looks like what these rulers and leaders are going to be commanded to do, this eventually is going to be the requirement of everyone in the whole empire. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be immediately thrown into a blazing furnace. It seems like it's sort of an odd thing, doesn't it? Not cut off your head, not imprisoned, you're not even cast into a lion's den, but cast into a blazing or burning furnace. Well, they've just finished this great construction project. There on site, no doubt, are still the furnaces that were used for making the brick that Nebuchadnezzar loved so much. He did not make brick just out of mud and set them out in the sun and let them dry under the hot sun until they were hard. No, he wanted something that would last much longer than that, so he fired all of his brick into great furnaces that were heated up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit or more, until they were as hard almost as what we would say concrete or cement. That's why they still exist today, because they were they were glazed, they were hard, and they were made in great furnaces in which the brick, as they were shaped, would then be put in there and a great fire kindled that would, during a period of time, they would then harden, and then it would be made that way. So probably several of those are around the site still, and that's probably the furnace that he has in mind. But even more than that, I just checked this past week. Archaeologists have found at least 2 evidences that this was a common practice among the Babylonians. Not the making of brick, that was a common practice too, but the actual threat of throwing people into one of these furnaces if they did not honor and worship the gods of the Chaldeans. They've actually found inscriptions in 2 different parts of the ancient Babylonian Empire in which it says exactly that. So what are the people going to do? Well, it's not going to be a problem for most of them, for they all came either from right there in Chaldea, where they were already used to worshiping idols, or they were imported from other parts of the empire that were also idolatrous. So just add one more to the list of those gods you would worship. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And so this great assemblage, whether it's hundreds or thousands of probably mostly men, when they hear the sound of the music, then they all fall down on their faces before the image. Except when you look around, there's 3 men over there that are still standing up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." And so they've been ratted out by some who are probably jealous of their position. And that shows up several times in the book of Daniel, by the way. And they identify which 3 it are in case the king didn't get the word some other way. And they say they pay no attention to your authority. They dishonor your gods, and they disobey your strict command. Furious with rage. This will be a characteristic of Nebuchadnezzar. He's very capricious sometimes. When his anger is lit up, then there's no telling what he's going to do. Very quickly, he can be furious. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" He's going to say, I'll give you a second chance. He wanted people to know that he was compassionate and generous. Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. Hey, all can be forgiven. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Remember, Nebuchadnezzar has already met the God of the Israelites in the Daniel interpreting his dream, but he did not meet the one true God from the standpoint of what his power was in terms of delivering or saving or protecting, but rather only as one who could tell his dream and interpret it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. These men whose faith we have no record of their faith really being tested since they first got here and first had to, in chapter 1, choose whether they were going to eat the king's food or stick to the Jewish diet that they had known all of their life. Their faith doesn't seem to have really been tested all that much until now, but they stand up. And out of respect for the king, they treat him with respect, but they tell him they can't worship his God. And that the God that they serve is able to deliver them if he chooses. But even if he does not choose to do that, they still will not worship the gods of Nebuchadnezzar. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. No more compassion. He ordered that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. We don't really know what this looks like. They found archaeological remains of some of the brick furnaces of the Babylonians, and they took several different shapes. I kind of like to think, based on the story here, that it would be sort of like taking one of our big oil tanks like you see out in the fields around here where they gather, but with no top on it. And that this is where the brick are made. There's doors in the side where when the fire is cooled down, they can go and take the fired brick out and put new brick in and rebuild the fire and get it started and so forth. And here's Nebuchadnezzar up on his high platform, probably at the very foot of his statue, and he can look down into that as all of this is going on. And so these men are cast into this blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. They take them and they throw them in, and they themselves are overcome in the flames and the heat from the furnace. And it seems like almost immediately, as the men are cast into the fire, a transformation takes place in Nebuchadnezzar, because it says, Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, Wasn't it 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? Certainly, O king, they replied. But he said, Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, untied and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening, probably one of the doors on the side where they used to take things in and bring things out, opened approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God." He already knew who they worshipped even before this event began. "Come out. Come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. The satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. Nebuchadnezzar felt like he had to make an example out of these men, because he's given this command to thousands of those who served under him to worship this image, and yet 3 don't do it. You can't let that go unaddressed, he felt. And all these men are still here, and they've seen what he has seen, and now they crowd around as they come out. And it says they saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. They were totally untouched by the effect of the furnace, except their bonds were now gone. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his messenger and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. This event begins back in verse 15 with Nebuchadnezzar saying, "Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" And it ends by Nebuchadnezzar himself saying, "For no other God can save in this way." What are the lessons that we might learn from this? We realize Daniel didn't follow this story with a set of thought questions at the end or key bullet points that we might draw out of this. But here are some that it seems to me are pretty clear. Number one, God is at work among all the nations, not just among his own people. And he's at work among all the nations, number one, on behalf of his people. But number two, because it's a part of his greater purpose to save, if it were possible, the whole world. And in this particular case, specifically, to bring Nebuchadnezzar to faith. Number two, God, the one true God, is the God of the past, because this same God that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel or Belteshazzar believed in as their fathers before them all the way back to the book of Genesis. God is that God, the God of the past. Not just the God of this one little nation here, but the God that created this whole world and everything in it. He's the God of the past. He's the God of the future. He's the God that told through Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, what that great statue meant and what the future holds. But he's also the God of the present. He's not just a God who did great things in the past and will do great things in the future. He's a God who still does great things in the present. Number three, as is so often the case, not just in Scripture, but in our own lives, it's always a contest between the gods that people worship and the one true God. And whether it's in our present day with the gods of power and materialism or humanism or evolution or whatever it may be, or whether it was the gods, the idols that these people in these ancient nations worship, it's the contest. It might be with Elijah on Mount Carmel against the priest of Baal. It might be Joseph in Egypt. It might be Moses against Pharaoh. whatever it might be, it's the gods of this world against the one true God. And when the question is asked over and over, what God will be able to deliver you, the people of God will always say, the God we serve is able to deliver us, and even if he does not, we will not worship your gods. Number 3, we can learn that we need to stand firm no matter what the outcome, because God is faithful. Living or dying, he is with us. They no doubt knew the great song of their own great king, King David, in the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. But it wasn't just that. For us, we would look at Matthew 28 and 20, when Jesus gives the Great Commission. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. And look, I am with you. That fourth person in the fire is with us too. Or when Stephen is being stoned at the end of Acts chapter 7, he looks up into heaven and says, look, I see the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. Richard Rogers used to make the point that almost everywhere else, and maybe everywhere else in Scripture where it refers to Christ being at the right hand of God, it always mentions him being seated. But in this one instance, he's standing. For he's intently watching what's happening to one who is betting his life on eternal life. And he's about to welcome another one home. Or even the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4, as he's writing that last letter to Timothy just months before he himself will be decapitated. He said, at my last trial, no one stood with me, but the Lord stood there with me. We need to know that the Lord is with us. So when you leave this place, and some of you will actually graduate, so when you leave this place, you may not know the future, but you know who holds it. And you may not have anyone to go with you, but the Lord will go with you. And then whether it's death by persecution in a fiery furnace, or by other means, or at last at the end of your service to your King, you quietly pass away into eternity in your sleep. You know, regardless, that he will say, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joys of your Lord. In the furnace, whether then or now, we have our faith in him. Thank you.